Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Will Pedersen, and I'm a Vice President of Client Support Services here at Decisions. And today we're going to be talking a bit about how to run actual data through your process to understand how changes to existing models or existing rules or flows affect historical data. Just a quick sort of little bit of housekeeping here. Next week is our Decisions Days event. We're going to be at the oceanfront in Virginia Beach. We've got over 100 customers coming. It's going to be a great time. If you're not signed up, there's still time. Please register on the site, reach out to your salesperson or your customer success manager. We would love to see you there. There's a ton of great training type and learning-based topics. I'm going to be talking about what we've learned about containers over the last year since we launched version 8 in February of last year. So lots of great stuff on the docket there. If you'd like to ask questions, please feel free to use the QA or chat. Myself or Chase will reply to those. This is going to be a pretty short one, so more questions, the better. Happy to answer whatever questions you might have. So what we're going to do is talk a bit about what it looks like for us to build our logic, talk a bit about what sort of differentiating types of testing in our tool so that we can really isolate the type of testing we're talking about here, which you'll hear referred to commonly as back testing. A little bit of overview about what decisions will store for you and what you need to design your flow to capture. And then we're going to give you an overview for a proposed solution design and a solution architecture. And then we're going to end with a bit of a demo of an application that we're going to make available to you to try to help with some of this setup. And so here's our problem statement today. How do we optimize the performance of our business logic over time? Oftentimes, when we think about this, we think about performances in terms of speed. How long does it take? How many milliseconds does a response take? Or we think about it in terms of failure. Like I'm testing to avoid failure. I'm load testing to avoid, to understand what my performance looks like at scale. But I'm not putting like a historical dimension on this and understanding that business logic is a living document. It changes over time. And I both need to functionally test it. I need to load test it, but I also need to what we're going to call here back testing. I need to understand how the results of that test would change against actual data that's been run through my process. And so a lot of our customers will build processes that are entirely or partially automated. You can see this in many of the initial demos that we give to customers as well. There'll be rules that determine automatic approval. And if those rules pass, automatic approval is granted. And if those rules fail, then it's sent for manual review. And so we have a lot of our customers who think about the trade-off between automatic and manual effort in the ROI calculations that they're doing to determine the fit of that use case. Small percentage increases in automatic approvals can have significant cost savings. And the inverse can be true. Small decreases in automatic approval can increase the amount of manual work required. Certain cases take minutes, certain cases take hours, certain cases might take weeks. And so the more we can do to increase that rate of approval, the less manual effort that is required. And one of the things that we'll see here that we need to keep apprised of is ensuring that new logic that's rolled out sort of maintains or improves that automatic approval rate. Now, not every decisions use case has a concept of a manual review associated with it. We are kind of constraining what we're talking about here to the idea of a automatic review that has a manual review associated with it. So some workflows are purely approvals, which we'll talk about here. I think I'm getting a little ahead of myself. We'll talk about that in more detail in a minute. So what do we want to try to do? We want to try to have a culture of experimentation. We want to be able to make changes and test those changes. We want to allow the business to be able to make hypotheses and then test those hypotheses. And one of the ways we can do that, which we'll see here in a moment, is actually having a back test strategy. And like I was saying just a moment ago, we want to do some risk reduction. We want to ensure that a future change is not problematic. That changing an acceptance criteria from X to Y doesn't decrease our the automatic acceptance or increase the amount of manual effort. And using a proper backtesting strategy, I think we can do both of those things at the same time. I've personally been doing a lot of reading about how experimentation in business can really lead to results. You'll see this in a lot of stuff like the lean startup by Eric Ries. Where experimentation and sort of tight feedback loops with the process are how you really grow or improve your products over time. So we're going to talk about two different projects in today's webinar. On the left, it's going to be our sample loan approval project. It's going to be a very simple approval process that we're going to talk through. Very, very simple. And then on the right-hand side is our sample, what we're calling our back testing project, or we're calling it our revision automated test, or RAT for short. And this is something which we'll see here, which we built and we've put in our app store to try to make the setup of some of the reporting and tracking over time easier, so that you don't have to start from zero when you're setting these things up. So again, there are going to be two different projects here. One of them is on the sample loan project is just a sample. It's very simple. On the right-hand side is actually something that is in our app store. Those of you that are customers today know that we do have an app store. It's on your My Apps folder. We are doing a lot of work recently to add a lot of great content in there at no cost. You can see on the bottom left-hand corner the revision automated testing application that we're going to talk through today. Application might be too strong of a word. It's a simple project. But if we look at our scorecard wizard and then released within the last week or two our dynamic questionnaire, those are two things that are much closer to full-fledged applications. Dynamic questionnaire is a really awesome thing that gives you the ability to generate custom decisions forms that operate very similar to like a Google form, so that you can build form experiences to get feedback from users without needing to use the actual form or flow designers. So what we're going to do here is we're going to be talking about a type of decisions use case. I mentioned this just a few minutes ago. We think about two main buckets when we think about decisions use cases, and we bucket those internally in terms of workflows or rules. On the left-hand side, we've got workflows or full user interfaces. These are forms, these are dashboards, reporting, lots of assignments, something we might call a work queue, or you might hear referred to as decisions management. We are not talking about those types of processes today. We're talking about rule engine or headless use cases. One of the things we'll talk about here in a few minutes when we start talking about our rule audit history is oftentimes we will talk about rule engine use cases, but that doesn't mean we only use the rule designer. It's more about how the rules, or very often the flows, get called. It's that they're called without user interface, not that rules explicitly are written. You can see here a flow as well as a rule in this screenshot here. And so there's two types of decisions use cases, and there's three types of testing. There's more types of testing than this, but these are I want to just compare and contrast three different types of testing to help really clear up or sort of make more clear what back testing is. We've got unit testing, A/B testing, and then back testing. If we look at unit testing first, unit testing is how we functionally test our flows or our projects. We can build individual unit tests and we can run those as a group. And they tell us if a test fails or passes. It doesn't tell us how long it took. And it doesn't tell us if it has behaved differently than it did. Right? What it does is it says this smoke test or this sanity test is passed. These are very important for us to ensure that the things we're building continue to operate as they have been. If we compare that with A/B testing, in decisions, we have, let me go back just one moment. Unit testing, of course, comes out of the box. Anyone who's built in our tool is very comfortable with building and maintaining unit tests, and should be comfortable with running those unit tests as they do development to ensure that the work they've done is correct. If we look at A/B testing, decisions, we have a thing called champion challenger. And in champion challenger, you can have a rule or a flow be called with a percentage function, and it will insert the challenger subflow, the challenger rule at that defined percent here. Here in the screenshot on the right-hand side, you can see it's set to 20%. But the goal here is to compare and contrast at runtime two different versions of a process, and then compare the results. So champion challenger lets us swap out one subflow or the other. Now, of course, there's expectations here in terms of, just like there would be for any kind of runtime selection, the inputs and the outputs of those processes need to be the same. But it allows us to have, at runtime, at scale, a variant of a flow or a rule run, and then allows us to store off that result in some way and then compare those two things over time. So it's going to be similar back testing, but it's more about testing during production than it is about retroactively viewing the work that's been done. And then that takes us, of course, to the topic that we want to talk a bit about today, which is back testing. And back testing is a way of analyzing potential performance of a strategy by applying it to real world historical data. Tons of analogs here in the investment world, where a trading strategy is going to be used to, they're going to retroactively apply a trading strategy, and they're going to see how that trading strategy would have played out. Now, for us, as we put more and more control over the business logic in the hands of the business analysts, this is a big thing that our product has been focused on. We've been releasing things like external truth tables, and these are logics. These are logic or rules that are able to have their values maintained by non-designer users. An external truth table can have its data sourced from a database, and we can put the management of that database data in the end user portal, unlike a traditional truth table where a user needs to be in the studio and make those changes. So as we're moving towards this more democratized world where non-developers and even non-low code users, but just pure business analysts or data analysts can control the process logic, we need to not only put that in their hands, we need to give them the ability to test those assumptions or those changes. And we'll see here that decisions is not going to capture this data for us automatically. Brings us to the question, though, of like, what does decisions save by default? So in decisions world, the workflow engine doesn't know what you're doing with it at any given moment of time. You know, some of our competitors, they have rule engines and workflows, and the design time experiences are different, or the code underlying those two things is different. In our world, everything is a flow. You might build a rule, but that rule is running the workflow engine. It's just a different design time skin on top of the workflow. And so the engine itself is very abstract, and it doesn't collect a ton of data for you automatically. And there's performance, use case, as well as security reasons. We don't want to capture data that might be sensitive unless you specify. So what you see here on the screen is the system activity view. This is what we capture. We see flow starts or flow and rule starts. We can bucket the number of flow steps that are called, number of thread jobs and API calls. So we're really capturing really high level sort of system activity data. But for back testing, what we're going to need is we're going to need the actual data itself. Now, we also have rule audit history. Rule audit history is a step level configuration, and that can be put on a step, on a truth table, on a rule set, or a normal statement rule, or any of the other types of rule behaviors that we have. And that will allow us to, you can see in this bottom part of the screen, capture the outcome of that rule, as well as a view of a plain text or rich text view of the rule that was executed with the data in line. Now, there's a few things we'll see in our example where our rule audit history is great, but may not fill the full need for you. And there's two scenarios where rule audit history might need to be added to. And those are, the first is, as I was mentioning a few minutes ago, rule engine use cases are often, not always, flows. And those flows coordinate the actions of many rules together. Rules or truth tables might send their output data downstream to other rules which consume that data, or they transform that data, so on and so forth. And rule audit history is a step-level configuration. So I could have a flow with multiple rules in it, and I could capture the rule audit history for each of those rules. I could even use the rule audit ID or the rule audit folder ID properties, which you can see highlighted in red here. And I might be able to use like flow tracking ID or case ID or something else, and coordinate those things together. But what it won't give me is it's not going to give me any insight into the other properties. In this example on the screen here, let's assume there's a third or a fourth property, maybe debt to income ratio. The rule audit history doesn't have those. It doesn't have the other properties of the object that the rules were not written to account for as a part of it. So we could use it as a review source, but we can't use it to retroactively run anything. So just kind of sort of, again here, the step level rule audit history being step level means that in a flow with multiple rules, it can become difficult for us to coordinate all of the analysis of that outcome data together. And it doesn't have concepts or the ability to retroactively include any of the additional properties that might be included. We do have a question here. How much data can the rule audit history store? That's a great question. It's just regular data in the database. So it will store as much as you want it to, likely given the volumes. The better question might be for us, Brian, is not how much can it store, but what is our cold storage pattern going to be? Because it's going to store as much as it can, and it's going to fill up these database tables, the rule audit history or rule phrase audit tables. And so how much, what is our cold storage pattern going to be? There's no real limit to how much it can store. There should be a practical limit, as if this table were to balloon in size, it might create some there could be possible sort of performance issues that occur. So what's the proposal here? I just mentioned that the workflow engine doesn't capture a lot of data for you intentionally, and rule audit history is not going to give us everything we need to implement a proper back testing pattern. And what we're going to do here, or what we're proposing here, and what this use case is built to do, is Decisions doesn't care where you pull your data from. It doesn't matter if it's in the local database or an external database. And so we'll see on the next diagram here, what we're going to do is we're going to leverage that ability to save and retrieve data from an external database or some sort of external data storage, like some sort of data lake thing or some sort of big data storage container that all of the major cloud service providers have some flavor of these days. And what you see on the screen here is traditional decisions call. We might receive an API. We're consuming API responses. We receive the response, we deserialize it, we run our logic against it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to serialize that input data along with the response data, and we're going to save it to an external data location and then send the response back. So the important addition here is that serialized input and response step. And what we're leveraging here is the ability to store data and serialize on demand any data object that we might have. And what that allows us to do, if we implement that as part of our process, is we can then make that data available to non-production environments so that we can run that production data in a non-prod or in a test setup here. So what you see is a decision server diagram, and we see a dev, a test, and a production server on the bottom. We see a repository server which is allowing us, as those of you who are current customers know, to send our work from the dev server to test and subsequently to production. But on the right-hand side, what we're doing is we're telling production to save its input data to an external database, and we're allowing the test server to connect to that database as well. Once we've got that in place, then we'll be able to do things like what we're going to show here in this quick demo of this App Store application, this revision automated test application. With that, I'm going to go ahead and modify my screen here really quickly and go into a bit of a quick demo. Chase, is my screen still reasonably viewable?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So I mentioned a few minutes ago that there's two applications here just to give us a lay of the land. We've got our revision automated testing application that we have put in our App Store, and we've got this sample loan project. So let's quickly look at our sample loan project. It is very, very simple. There's a single flow here, and sample main flow does a null check to ensure a particular value is not null. It runs a truth table, which we'll go into in a moment here. It sums the results of that truth table, saves to that external data store, and then sends all that data back. So we're doing a very simple scoring operation. If I edit this truth table, you'll see what we're doing is we're looking at two properties of a sample loan object here. The sample loan, we're looking at the credit score, and we're looking at the annual gross income. And on the right-hand side, you'll see that we are outputting different values, either positive or negative, for different properties. We're ignoring certain column cells. And so, for example, if your sample loan credit score is less than 525, we're going to apply -50. If your income is over 57,000, we are going to give you a +25. And we're going to take this information for every row that returns true. We're going to sum those values, and we're going to send that back to the caller. So this is very standard, very simple rule scoring operation. And then what I want to do is switch my tab here. And then we're going to look at this revision automated test. So what we've done here with this thing is create a way for you to quickly stand up a test harness so that if you had something like this simple loan application, you could install it again into your test server, configure it with a few simple flows, and start running your tests. So if I were setting this up the first time, I would come here to this revision auto test setups folder, and I'd click this button called create new auto test. And I'm going to call this sample loan test 2. I'm going to go ahead and select the main flow here, which will be that sample flow. It's going to give me a view of the folder tree on the left-hand side. I'm going to find the parent folder. I'm going to find sample main flow here, and I'm going to select it. And then it's going to go ahead and prompt me to add a wrapper and an input flow here. So I'm going to click wrapper. It's going to create this flow for me, and it's going to take me right into the editor here. And it's going to give me some annotation, and it's going to walk me through how I can set this wrapper flow up. I'm just going to back out of there for now. And I'm going to do the same thing for an input flow. So the idea here is this revision automated test project, you give it an input flow that outputs serialized data. You can see on the end step here, output of a string list called serialized JSON input list. And then you give it your main flow plus a little bit of business logic for you to be able to tell the project if this is an approval or a manual review or whatever custom sort of string text that you'd like to include there. You set those two things up, and then you create. So I'm going to click create here. And if I move my column over here to loan test 2, you'll notice I get this view here. Now I'm going to go ahead and move to a fully set up one. So I'm going to come back, and I'm going to go to the new test sample project here where I've been running some data. Oops, excuse me, that's not the right one. Sample loan tester. There we go, where I have been running some data. And so if I were to look at this, I could go over here to open input flow. That's going to take me to the input flow. Now, I'm doing all this on my local, so I am sourcing local database data. But the idea for this, this project is this would be an external database connection. But just to be transparent, all of this is happening on my local right now. So I'm fetching some saved data and I'm serializing that into a list and then passing it out the end step here. And again, if I were to do the same, but open the main wrapper flow, you'll see what I'm going to do here is I'm running my main flow, the flow that we looked at that has the rule table. I'm mapping a few values and then I'm checking. So in our test here, anything that scores over 50 is considered automatically approved, and anything that scores below 50 is sent for manual review. That's the sort of criteria for this example for manual versus automated review. And what that allows me to do is this. You can see on the left-hand side, I've got test sets that have been run. And on the right-hand side, I've got the results of those things that have been run. And I can quickly view the number of approvals versus manual review or rejections here on the left-hand report. And I can click through these things and I can compare and contrast the differences between these. As I move through, you'll notice the charts change and things of that nature. And then what I can do is run this test. I've fully configured my input flow. I've configured my wrapper. And I'm going to say, testing change to minimum credit score. And I'll click Save Serialized JSON Result and run. And it's going to run a new test for me, and it's going to give me the results of that test. Not really interesting in and of its own right. But now what this lets me to do is begin to start really testing as I'm running this in production, as I'm gaining more data, as I'm saving that data in that external database. I am able to then go and start making changes to my logic and to see how those changes propagate historically. So what I'm going to do is come back to this sample main flow here for our sample project. Let's go edit our truth table here. So what happens if we take our negative score for our credit score and we drop this down? I'll go ahead and drop this to anything below 575. I'm gonna go ahead and save this. And I can come back to my other tab here. And now, because I've got this plumbing in place, I can quickly run this test again. I'll say moved credit score, minimum to 575. And I do want to save the results. I'll click run here. Okay, no change there. Okay, so then we'll come back here and I'm going to go ahead and set this to 640. I'll try this now. Let me save this, see if this actually makes a difference for me here. I've saved that. I'll come back here, run the test. I'll say, credit score, credit move to 640. Select save serialized data and run. Okay, no change there. Still approving most things. So let's go ahead and what if we remove the positive score for 650 here? I'll go ahead and let me delete this row and save this. And we'll try running this again. So we'll say, removed positive score, for 650 credit. And we'll save the results and we'll run. There you go. Now you can see we've gone from an approval rate of roughly 50% down to 10%, if even. Here you can see what we're doing here is showing you on the right-hand side the approvals and rejections. Now these are just things you're setting up in this project. You notice here on the right-hand side, there's a property on this test object called result title. And you feed it approval or rejected here. And we have category 1 and we have category 2. Those are properties in the object that you're mapping to in your flow. So we've used the state of the loan as category 1, and we've used the computed score as category 2 on the right-hand side here. And you'd be able to move these things and see the differences. Now, the one thing is, Decision's not really going to be a good place to do the data analysis at. but we wanted to provide some ability to quickly review the differences. So we know here, by quickly looking at these two records, we went from 27 to 7 approvals with the current data set that we have. And so we added this test compare page. And what that lets me do is see the test sets that I've run, select 2 of them. So here I'm going to select a test set from 130 and from 129, and I can compare them. And it's going to show me the particular requests that were that are different between the two. So here, for example, this request was rejected and is now was approved and is now rejected. Might be the way to read this. We are actually saving all of the data, which is why if you were to click Run Test here with the Save Serialized Data set to false, we won't save any PII. We wanted to make it configurable for you to save that data or not, being sort of considerate of sensitive information. But yeah, that's there's a few questions here. Is this dashboard configurable? Can you view multiple sites side by side? Yes. Yes, this is just a decisions dashboard that we've built. If we were to talk about how we built it, this sample loan tester folder is a folder extension that has a custom dashboard on it, which only includes the test results which are assigned to it. The idea was for us to be able to have this one application be able to test multiple different projects for you. It wouldn't even have to be a project. You could have multiple process flows in one project, have separate test data for these things. Are the right-hand dashboards? Yes, everything in these reports is exportable. These are just decisions charts, and these are reports, and there's download actions on every decisions report header for you to be able to download these into Excel or some other data analytics software and do data analysis. I just want to restate, the goal was not to create or give the appearance of a data analysis tool here, but to provide some of the main plumbing for some of this test work that you might have to do here. And that really is the whole demo. As I was saying before, this is in the App Store. If you were to go to your My Apps folder, you can see revision automated testing here. You can download this and start using it today if you have a need to be able to test this. We got a healthcare customer of ours, and they do prior auth as well as other approvals. And the business will come to them and they'll ask questions like, hey, what if we move, property X to Y? And right now they're struggling to know how that will affect the process. It's hard to forecast that into the future. And so what we did is in that discussion is sort of came up with the idea of leveraging an external data storage and connections from test and prod to some serialized database data to be able to pull this information out and run the current models against it. One of the things I don't have here, because it's all on my local, that we do have as part of this project though, is revision information. If I come back to my sample loan tester, you'll notice here I have a column for revision ID. So the project is built to steal the revision ID. Now, and if we were building this with, if we were actually doing work on dev and then deploying to test, we could track the acceptance rate or the pass rate or the rejection rate, or whatever the sort of process specific categories might be, to a specific revision ID that would be in the repo server as well. This is all on my local, so I can't show this, but this does work. You'd be able to, if you use this project, make use of that property today as well. I'll go ahead and stop there and ask and pause and see if there's any questions from anybody.
There have been a couple questions that have come through.
Are they in the queue? I've been answering those as we go.
Are you talking about here in the chat? So I know we answered the first one from Brian. Looks like there's one from another from Brian. We got those.
Yep. So Ian's questions, yes, we can configure all these dashboards. If we were to come and look, you'd see I could come into my data structures folder here. That thing, we name this thing auto test settings. I could come to list here, and I could come to page data overview, and I could find the page here, which is auto test settings main. And you can see I can edit this page to include whatever I want. It's just a decisions page with reports and some charts on it. And to Brian's question, yes, all the data that's been shown here is exportable in CSV or Excel. Any other questions from anybody?
So you mentioned real quick where to get the application. Where can they find this again?
In the App Store. So if you're on your decisions server, wherever that decision server might be, and you go to the My Apps page, you may, if you have projects in here, go to list. You're going to go to this App Store tab here along the top, and this is where all of our App Store content is going to be. Can you use an API to export data? Yes, absolutely. In fact, if I were to really quickly, so let me go and find, just a moment here, a report. So let's look at test results. I'm going to write a new report really quickly, and I'm going to do this for all test results. I'll just call this all test results. And I'll create this. I'm going to find it. I'm going to go ahead and build a decisions report here. I know that this thing, I know the data type name. I'm just going to search for auto, and here's auto test set. I'm going to go ahead and just add a couple properties here, which would be its ID, created on date, created by, the JSON that was, if save JSON is true, the approval count, the notes, whatever these properties might be. Now what I can do is I can call this report as an API. So if I come to configure integration on the top here, actually, let me save this really quickly before I do that. I can come to configure integration, and I can allow decisions to expose this as an API. I'm going to click API service, leave everything else the same, but I can override the service URL or change the data format. Once I've set this up, you'll notice this view button is here, and I can do this on rules and flows as well as reports. If I click view, it's going to bring up this this API definition, this Swagger-like view. And what I'm going to do here is just to show you what this might look like. I'm going to copy this URL and just put it into a browser just to make a get call. And what you'll see here is it's going to spit back that report as JSON to me. And so here's one way, not the only way, that you could call report data in our application as a service. And you could change this to, you know, I could, if I need XML, I could change this from JSON to XML and send XML back. All right, Stephanie's got a question. Can this approach be leveraged to understand performance similar to process mining as well? How does this compare to process mining? Yeah, I would not. So interesting thing about process mining, when we were planning this webinar originally, it was going to be to use process mining. But the difficulty here is, like, if you were to look at the response time of this flow, like this flow that has this truth table in it, it's going to be, let's just say 5 milliseconds, right? It's somewhere in the handful of milliseconds probably. Now that doesn't give a process mining tool much information. You know, not our process mining tool, not exclusively to our process mining tool, but those are, if I come back to my slides here, and I'm sorry being not in the right view, but I think this would be helpful to answer your question. If we look at these types of use cases, give me just a minute. Let me switch my view here. There we go. Process mining is a better fit when we're talking about the use cases on the left-hand side, workflows or UI. These are things we would call like flow execution extensions or process folders or cases. And those are things that are stateful. They move through states, they have states, there's assignments, not always, but often. And those things are not processed in like the millisecond range. So process mining tracks those types of cases. So this is not a performance test. Like we would still want to use something like JMeter and put like, 250 or 500 users on this flow making API calls in to see what our average response time is, or maybe to track how that average response time increases, as we add more users. Make sure that it's linear and that it's that nothing crazy is happening. So I don't think process mining is a fit for this type of ask because of how fast it is and how sort of stateless each of these things is. It's just making a request. Request comes in, decisions, runs logic, and then shoots that request back. And it happens real fast. It is fit for these decisions use cases on the left-hand side where we're talking about cases or process folders, things of that nature. Any other questions from anybody? Yeah, so Stephanie, we do have, I don't think we have the document published yet, but we have a document walking you through how to use this. So if I'm on my doc site here and I come to projects, under the accelerators here, we'll have a document which walks you through how to use the RAT project that we've been talking about here. So it'll walk you through setting it up and configuring it. It probably won't walk you through the entirety of the piece here. As we were saying, there is a bit of expectation for how you're saving off. There's a couple dependencies here that you've got a process in production. You've configured or designed that process to save its transactional data to a data store somewhere, and you've made that data available, at least allowed the test server access to that data. If you have those three things done, then this RAT project would help you, would shorten the time span to be able to set something up like this. It's not the actual process itself. It's just the sort of testing apparatus piece. But yeah, we'll have documentation here almost certainly by the end of next week at the latest. And if you need any help, your customer success manager, please reach out to your customer success manager or your account executive if you're not yet a Decisions customer, and we would be happy to organize some resources to help you out with this for sure. Is that it, Chase?
Yes.
Happy to hang out and give people a few more minutes to answer questions if you'd like.
Yeah, so while we're waiting, I'll just real quick reiterate thank you for coming. We appreciate the time you spent on this webinar. We will post it to our website and YouTube channel in a couple weeks. Next week, we would normally have it done in a few days, but next week it's Decisions Days. It's our big conference we mentioned at the start of the webinar. We're having it here in Virginia Beach, and we're very excited to host our customers, our prospects, our partners for this really fun event that'll happen over the next few days, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of next week. Feel free to go to decisions.com or decisionsdays.com to check out the full agenda if you've not already registered. And it's not too late. Happy to have you come out, show off what we're doing in Decisions. We've got a lot of great training and some sessions from our customers and partners sharing some of the cool things that they're doing with Decisions. So come check it out, socialize with us, have a good time, and learn some great stuff about Decisions.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you can't make that, we're happy to host you at some future events. We're doing trainings every quarter. We're hosting events in local areas throughout the country on various times, and we're at some conferences here and there. So that's another great opportunity to meet us and see us out in the wild. So again, thank you for joining.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.